What is going on, you beautiful humans? Welcome back to the channel. And today we're diving into a topic that has been dominating headlines. And of course, that is tariffs, the global economy, and should you really buy the dip, seeing as we have a lot of strong opinions out there about the perfect time to buy, as this is where millionaires are made. But of course, the truth, as always, is more nuanced. And we are going to be breaking down what is really happening, how it impacts the global economy and your wallet, and are we really missing the mark when there's a collective out there telling people to buy the dip? And is this a realistic strategy? But I want to offer some insight on trying to navigate these uncertain times. And let's try to stick to the basics, because the echo chambers out there seem to be throwing a lot of numbers around that are really just kind of the same salacious tweet. Tariffs are essentially taxes on imported goods. And I think we have actually determined that. I hope we agree. And the argument is often made that these are taxes on companies, not consumers. And technically, that is true. But I see many out there making statements that the business itself doesn't have to pass this on to the consumer. But here's a reality. Businesses are in business to make a profit, and publicly traded companies also have shareholders that they are also catering to. Now, you can tell that many of these individuals out there arguing the point that the business doesn't have to pass this on to you haven't actually run their own businesses. Not the case for all I know, but I would say for most. And I will say that I have never owned or run a publicly traded company, but I have had several businesses over the years, including one that had actual payroll, R&D, licensing, marketing, offices, and a portfolio of clients, and basically all of the overhead that essentially goes along with running a well-established business in a major metropolitan area. And I will just leave it at that for now. I have been in many of the same spheres of CEOs and COOs and CFOs for a lot of years, and I can confidently say that if their costs go up, they're likely to pass those costs on to you, the consumer, in the form of higher prices. This isn't some conspiracy, it's basic economics. We have seen this play out time and time again. Even if they're not publicly traded, they still have payroll and other overhead that they have to cover. So we have to consider the increased cost for raw materials, the components, or even those finished goods directly impacting the bottom line. Companies have to either absorb those costs, which cuts into their profit margins, or they raise prices. And in a competitive market, they often have little choice but to do the latter. So while the tariff itself isn't a direct tax on you, the ripple effect absolutely is. Now, of course, this is another argument that we hear, that bringing manufacturing back to the US will create jobs and raise wages. And while that's a nice idea in theory, it's really not the whole story. And yes, some jobs might come back, but manufacturing is increasingly automated, and we are not talking about a return to the factory floors of the 1950s. And here's the thing, even if wages do rise, that doesn't necessarily mean you're better off. If the cost of the goods also rise due to the tariffs and increased production costs in the US, you're essentially running in place. Your higher salary just buys you the same amount of stuff. This is inflation 101, and historically, inflation can outpace wage growth, meaning you actually lose purchasing power. Now, one of my side projects I have is that I am a tech reviewer and have been for years, so let me actually just share like a little nugget with you, keeping in mind that I know that the situation has evolved, but it is something that I think is relevant. So in 2012, Google acquired Motorola Mobility for $12.5 billion. A significant motivation behind that purchase was to bolster Google's patent portfolio, which would help protect the Android ecosystem. However, Google also had ambitions to innovate in hardware and potentially influence the direction of smartphone manufacturing. Google did explore manufacturing initiatives with Motorola, including the Moto X phone, which I have right here. I loved this phone. This was one of my all-time favorite phones. But just a side note. But assembly having been done in the US, there were goals to customize and produce devices closer to the consumer. However, these efforts face significant challenges. Manufacturing in the US is generally more expensive than in any other regions, particularly Asia, where they have established supply chains and manufacturing infrastructure are highly efficient. So competing in the highly competitive smartphone market, which demands rapid innovation and cost effectiveness, that proved really difficult. And honestly, the iPhone as we know it just kept taking market share, and other players like BlackBerry and Nokia phones were also just diving. So in 2014, Google sold Motorola Mobility to Lenovo for $2.9 billion. And this was actually a substantial loss for Google. Google retained most of Motorola's patent portfolio, which was a key objective of the original acquisition. And Lenovo acquired the Motorola brand and its hardware business, but at this time, they have about 3.5% market share here in the US, with more presence in other countries. But the key takeaway here is the Google Motorola situation illustrates the difficulties of competing in the global electronics manufacturing landscape. Factors such as higher labor costs, established supply chains, and existing manufacturing infrastructure played a significant role. It pretty much highlights that reshoring manufacturing is a complex issue with economic realities that can't be easily ignored, even for Google. So let's actually talk about the stock market then, because we have seen some massive volatility, especially even today as I'm recording this. And the buy the dip mantra is everywhere. And yes, historically, market corrections can present buying opportunities, but here's the catch. Most people aren't in a position to take advantage of it. And why is that? Well, because one, they don't have the cash. Many people are living paycheck to paycheck and don't have extra money to invest. And you can say like, well, that is irresponsible of them. We just don't know what someone is going through. It could be a catastrophic event in their lives. But second, they're afraid. Market volatility can be scary and many people panic and sell at the wrong time. And then of course, another one is that they don't understand the risks. Investing in a down market requires long-term perspective and tolerance for that risk. And you can't always move investments around very easily in an employer-sponsored 401k like you might be able to in your IRA or your individual brokerage account. And there are quite a few of you out there that will soon need to take a required minimum distribution out of your 401k because you're already retired. But I would also assume that many of you out there are in bonds or less volatile holdings, but it can still sting. Now, I can share that what I'm doing for my family is that we are focusing on saving cash and managing our existing finances rather than trying to time the market. And of course, again, you have to talk to your financial advisor, your CPA, your professional. But a market correction can be an opportunity for those with a long-term view and the funds really available to invest. But it also has a potential to wipe out a significant portion of your savings if you are not careful. And honestly, for many of you out there, you may need to remain as liquid as possible. I will also share that although we invested more heavily after the 2008 recession, and many of the stocks that we own today are dollar cost averaged way, way down, and we've even gone through several stock splits. So basically, they are still way down than what they are priced at today and still worth quite a bit. However, we were also in a position at the time to do so based on some liquidation that we had already taken advantage of before that crash. My wife and I do not have family money or any massive inheritance coming our way. We have done this all on our own. But I can also say that there were times where we heard over and over again that now's the time to buy the dip. But when you've got kids in tow and some uncertainty ahead of you, then prioritizing that cushion is paramount. So what can be a balanced approach? So if you are married or have a partner, especially when retirement and living expenses are commingled, carve out some time to talk and definitely put Twitter out of sight. Focus on your budget, cut those unnecessary expenses and negotiate any fees that you can. Your internet service provider, your cell phone bill. Do you need that ad-free Spotify experience? And I mean, I know it is pretty nice, but you get what I'm saying. I'm not telling you to completely cut the fun out of your lives, but are there ways to get the same service for less? And then of course, there is your emergency fund. If you already have one, that is great. And if it's 3 to 6 months, think about funding more if you are able to. And then of course, pay down that high interest debt. Credit card debt will eat you alive in an inflationary environment. And even though there are some buying opportunities out there in the market, I still believe that you are going to have an impossible scenario of beating 20+% on that interest in the short term. And then of course, don't panic about the market. If you're invested for the long term, stay the course. It might look bad on paper, but you're not losing until you sell, which I know for some of you who have to take that RMD, I know that might look more bleak, but it is tough, but you're not pulling out all of your money out of your portfolio all at once. And then of course, educate yourself. Understand how tariffs and economic policies affect your finances and even how it might impact you at work. Keep your ear to the rail where you are because this may give you some idea of really what it might look like for your future at that company. And then of course, stay informed, but don't get caught up in the hype. There are a lot of folks stirring the pot online, but also keep in mind that there are a lot of hacked accounts. Many of those were like abandoned years ago and then have been taken over by another entity, and plenty of bots that keep repeating the same headlines and also spouting off that they're buying 10,000 shares of this or 10,000 shares of that. Most people who are actually trading and doing their research don't have time to get mixed up in the online sea of fragile egos. They are working to improve their station in life, and it's a real shame that we are fighting for a side here when it is supposed to be a community, even globally. But there's really just a lot of noise out there. And of course, the bottom line is these are complex issues with no easy answers. We need to be realistic about the potential impact on our wallets and take a balanced approach to our finances. Don't let anyone tell you that it is all black and white or as simple as that. Do your own research, understand your risk tolerance, and make informed decisions. And as I shouldn't need to repeat, but do talk to your financial advisor if you have a little extra cash that you can make an investment, and make that wisely. And again, look at that long term. But as always, I appreciate your time here, and I hope this gives you a more nuanced perspective on the situation that we're in. Remember, knowledge is power. Don't just repeat what you hear. Think critically and make informed choices. And if you found this video helpful, please jump it in the comments and let me know how this is affecting you. Stay informed and stay empowered on your next level up, and I will catch you right back here on the next one.